That's great. And that leads us quite beautifully into the crux of today, which is this effect of exercise on performers, or particularly on professional voice users. And thank you. I remember when I put something out on my Instagram, and Claudia got back to me saying that this was something she was really interested in when she was at the Guildhall. So can you elaborate? Did you say you wrote your dissertation in this sort of area?
Yeah, so my another funny story. My initial dissertation idea was to do it based on, is it healthy for opera singers to lift weights, and does that have an effect on their voice? So I started the research on that, but I just found that there wasn't a lot of literature and reading on it. So my supervisor said, look, it's going to be really difficult for you to do this and to write a convincing dissertation, so think of something else. So I did, but it didn't stop me from reading up about it and trying to learn more. And there isn't a lot of reading or literature on it. There's no studies that show whether it's good or bad, so it's something that is still something that you need to kind of figure out yourself. And that's kind of what I've been doing, looking at, okay, how does the singer's voice work? Okay, what does exercising do to this muscle group? So it's kind of piecing it together.
I found the same. And I'm so glad to have this chat with you about it. It as much as, I love singing and obviously the opera world, and as much as the bubble that I put myself in, the singer bubble, makes me think that it's really, really popular and important. Of course, as we were just saying, it's a tiny niche industry. And if you if you were in a physiotherapy lab or whatever, human research exercise lab, and asked for funding for a proposal on the effect of exercise on opera singers, you wouldn't get the funding because unfortunately there's just not enough interest in this. Now, what I'm hoping, and what this conversation is a part of, is that we could sort of do this work to at least some extent, or at least get the ball really rolling at the Voice Care Center, because we have this whole team of people who are interested in it, and we have a physiotherapist, we have osteopath, we have speech therapists, we have people who do massage, we work with an ENT. So there's really a team in place that can sort of do some real work. But in your research, did you come to any conclusions about, I guess, specifically any potential benefit or detriment to be experienced when voice actors or singers exercise or particularly lift weights?
Yeah, so I found that there was a lot of benefits to it as opposed to detriments. So firstly, exercise, whether it's cardio or if it's lifting weights, it builds your stamina. And I know from being in rehearsals and working on shows, you opera singers have a lot to deal with. So if you compare an opera in today's world with what it was like in the 17th century, you guys are doing so much more moving around. Before, the singers would just kind of stand there and sing out, but now you might be dancing, you might be running from one side of the stage to the other, you might be climbing up things, you might be moving scenery. While you're doing this, you're also trying to hit the notes and make sure make sure you sing.
The theatrical demands are definitely higher than the expectations are different. I had very eye-opening experience the first time I sang the role Don Giovanni, and the show opens with a very physically active scene. You're having a fight with this character Donna Anna, and then her father comes along, and you basically have a fight to the death in some form. Now, I've done it where there's been guns, I've done it when there's been swords, I've done it where I've beaten a guy's head with a rock. It's but it's physical regardless of what you do. And then there's this real sort of pianissimo trio of the death of this father, and the three men are singing together, and it's slow and sustained and quiet. And if you go too hard on the sword fight or whatever and don't breathe and are out of shape, it's impossible to get that trick. And I think I often recommend to singers a sort of form of high intensity interval training for that purpose, because what I understand is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that the high intensity interval training helps to be able to bring your respiratory rate and heart rate back down quickly after a burst of intensive exercise. So if you then map that onto singing or into that scene I just described, sure, your heart rate and respiratory rate will be elevated slightly from, or maybe even somewhat from the fight. But if you have that cardiovascular fitness trained through HIIT training, it's likely they will be able to come down much more quickly. Does that sort of ring true with your experience?
Yes, yeah, you're spot on with that. Yeah, so that high intensity can help really. It helps you almost manage your stamina, or be able to control it in a better way than if you didn't do it. So yeah, for scenes like that, I think it's really important that singers have, some form of training that improves their capability of doing so.
There's also some very recent research, which you may have come across, but if not, I'd love to send it to you to see what you think. But my colleague, Dr. Geneva Williams, works with singers, and she sent it to me. And it was research regarding, I'll add a link to it because I might fudge it a bit, but it was research regarding vocal recovery time. Because obviously when you sing an opera or speak all day or whatever, it's taxing on your vocal mechanism. And the research found that individuals who are cardiovascularly trained had increased, not increased in terms of time, but more effective vocal recovery time. So they actually recovered more quickly from intensive use of the voice. Because of increased blood flow, better metabolic profile, and so forth. Have you come across anything like that?
I haven't read that one specifically, but when I've been looking at how a voice works and how our breathing works, it is all controlled by muscles. So, in the logical sense, if you're able to train a muscle, it gets stronger. You're able to control it better. And therefore, when you use it in everyday life or functionally, then it improves, its use. So, just like any other muscle, not just what you're singing with and how you speak, but all the muscles around it, they've got a role to play in it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's awareness of the musculature, I think, or training of the musculature develops a sort of proprioception that can be useful in physical activities, any physical activity. If you know what it feels like to flex your left pec or something, that means you can seek to avoid that sensation because of enhanced musculature awareness, enhanced proprioception.
Yeah.
Just so we're not, seeming, I guess, too biased, because obviously, we both love the gym. And I think, when I read research that suggests that exercise is good for the voice, it's obviously pleasing to me. And that can be a dangerous route to go down because, oh, great, done and dusted, it's fine, exercise is great for the voice. You've got to be almost doubly skeptical if the information you're reading is pleasing to you. Have you found any potential detriment to exercising the voice or lifting weights? Or I guess more specifically, are there any exercises or exercise modalities that you would recommend singers avoid for any particular reason?
Yeah, I mean, any detriment to anyone partaking in exercise is if you have a trainer who isn't very good or you haven't got a lot of correct information on it. So, if you have a trainer who just throws exercises at you and doesn't take into account you as a person, you're going to encounter some kind of injury. And if you're a singer, it could damage your, your instrument.
Yeah.
There was a lot of talk about grunting in the gym. So, I'm sure if you've been in the gym and you've been to the man cave, as it's sometimes called, you hear,
Where the big dumbbells are. Yeah.
exactly. You hear those guys grunting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know enough about if that affects the voice, but I can imagine if you're grunting and placing force on your vocal cords, it could do some damage to it. I'm not sure if it would do damage in the long run, but certainly in the short term.
Acutely, you could walk out of the gym hoarse if you were sort of screaming and grunting.
Yeah.
But Claudia, where I train, I have gone to a few hardcore gyms in my time, but I got to be honest, I'm too old and I'm not strong enough to hold my own in those anymore. But where I train, it's sort of bad gym etiquette to huff and puff and grunt and heave. Do you? I'm sorry to ask this, but like, do you grunt when you lift? Obviously, you train really hard to get the results you do. Are you grunting when you're lifting weights?
I have to be honest, I'm not actually sure if I do.
Something to be wary of. Like
Yeah.
squat.
I mean, I know that I make some kind of noise when I'm reaching failure.
Okay.
I don't grunt as much as some of the guys who really go for it. But there's a bit of struggle in some things, so there's a bit of, a little bit of grunting.
I do think, fine. I take your point about reaching failure and there being a sort of extra push you can get from a sort of respiratory expulsion. But I encourage one tip, because I do think there are some potential detriments to exercise and lifting weights in the voice, not generally, but specifically. And one of them you've brought up beautifully, this idea of heaving, grunting, engaging that grunting reflex of the cords, and the association between effort, physical effort, and that mechanism of closing the cords. Because if you go to pick up a table and go, huh, what that does is close your cords, close your throat. This is the opposite of singing. And I do notice that if there can be almost a psychological association between effort and that mechanism. And so then when you come to singing a high note, which does take physical effort, you might subconsciously engage this throat closing reflex because you're thinking of effort, and that's a definite no-no. I think that's a real mistake. And what I encourage singers to do is actually, if you are getting to that more fatiguing part of the set, to think almost the opposite. I'm going to open my throat and breathe out, almost more like a sort of yoga or Pilates style breath. And that will then start to have the opposite effect. You start to associate effort with an opening and a relaxing of the throat, which I find has been helpful. Now, the big caveat to that, and this is where the sort of maybe incompatibility argument might come in, is I wonder, and I'm not sure, if someone were to reach your level, that the level of intensity of training that you need, maybe these things become incompatible. Do you know what I mean? Like the intensity of training that you need to reach your goal as a fitness a bikini competitor, you might need to, excuse me, but grunt a little bit. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And yeah, I suppose if I were to train someone who was an opera singer, I I definitely wouldn't give them the same kind of program or even intensity that I'm on, because we've both got very different goals. So just because someone's grunting in a gym because they're lifting heavy, it doesn't mean you as a singer needs to do the same to achieve your goals. It's very individualized. That's
Yeah.
kind of where I sit with that one.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I just wonder if, you know, I think exercise and even lifting weights and good singing are compatible. And then, you know, they're fully compatible, fully compatible until a point of extremity. And then if you really want to be optimize your singing or optimize your bodybuilding, they start to diverge a little bit. And actually, what the advice because I do get a lot of singers now come to me who are trained heavily in CrossFit or lifting weights or even powerlifting or a few martial artists. I often say, well, look, when you get to that point, a decision must be made. Are you a CrossFit athlete, or are you willing to sacrifice a little bit? You can still be really fit, really strong, really healthy, but are you willing to sacrifice 10 seconds of your WOD time to sing a role at the Metropolitan Opera? And that's certainly the concession I had to make, because, you know, I would love to train more and harder than I currently do, but I find at a point, it just hits a point where the training intensity is so high that it starts to detract a bit from the intensity I can give to the singing. And these are neurologically demanding.
Yeah, and I mean that there's quite a lot of reading that I did, where it was done by a lot of singing teachers. So I kind of took it with a pinch of salt, but they were saying that if muscles get too big, then it can have an impact on how a singer does perform. So, you know, if you want to just be fit and go to the gym and still do your singing, then you can do that. But as you said, once you reach that place where you almost have to make a decision on what direction you want to go in, I think it's valid, because you know, when you're breathing, you've got muscles that help you breathe in, and then you've got muscles that help you breathe out. And obviously when you're singing, you need to have control of the breath. If the muscles that are used to breathe out are too big, there might be an impact. You know, I'm not sure what would actually happen. There's no reading about it, but I can imagine it would have an impact on it.
That's a really good point. I think you might be referring to some of the work of a fantastic teacher at the Guildhall called Janice Chapman, an Australian teacher. I don't know if you ever came across any. I mean, I actually learned with her for a while. She's a brilliant teacher, and she talks about also something that I really agree with, and something I've seen, because at the Voice Care Centre we work with a lot of West End performers and standard, you know, spoken theatre actors, and there is a pressure for a lot of young men, particularly in the musical theatre world, to look a certain way, to be like that really muscular, that lean sort of physique, because it, you know, it appeals to a certain crowd, and that's fine. But it's hard to sustain that look for 3, 4, 5 years. You know, it's particularly, you know, when you start to get past 30, and we have a lot of younger men come to us who have. There's a certain look where it's all about the development of the abs, pecs, shoulders, and biceps. And, you know, because then you get that sort of beach look, you know, the beach muscles. And what I found in several clients now is this exacerbation of a thoracic kyphosis. That sort of, you know, those guys you see at the gym who want to look super huge and they sort of walk around a bit like this. They sort of, I think they call it invisible lat syndrome, where you
That's the one, yeah.
And over time, the training of those muscles, the chest, they're all muscles that relate to thoracic kyphosis, a sort of rounding of the shoulders, that sort of gorilla look. And
Mm.
I think this often happens from an imbalance in training. If you train all the pushing muscles, but forget or don't train as much the pulling muscles, because you can't see your back. So I think a lot of people tend to neglect it. And doing things like pull-ups and deadlifts and rows is also quite draining, quite tiring. Much easier to sit on a chest press machine and just press out a few reps, I mean, clearly from the way you look, you have good balance in your training. Is this something that you focus on?
Oh, sorry, I missed the last bit.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, clearly from your physique, from the way you look, you obviously have very good balance in your training. Is this a particular focus for you?
Yeah, I mean, for bikini, the physique is, there's certain things that they look for. So it's about glutes, hamstrings, and shoulders. So a lot of the time, competitors can get into a routine where it isn't balanced. But my coach and I, we keep it balanced. Just because you're training a muscle, just because I'm doing a chest press, it doesn't mean my chest is going to get huge. If you're training one side of your body, you need to train the other side to keep that balance, as you said.
And I think this is good advice for singers. If make sure you train your legs. Make sure you train your back. It's not just about the shoulders and the pecs and the abs, because actually these are the muscles that, in my experience and from what I've read, the ones that may potentially get in the way of correct vocal and breathing technique.
Yeah. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. I think, as you said, especially the chest and the abs, it's one that's very, you'll have opinions on it. So singing teachers will say, don't train your abs, don't train your core, don't do any press and movement. But I think as long as it's done correctly and with the correct intensity, then you shouldn't have a problem.
This is perfect. I think you've managed to, I've been trying to summarize this for months, and you've just done it better than I have. Correct form and correct intensity. That's it. I don't necessarily disagree with the core training aspect that a lot of singing teachers warn about. I think people who just do tons of crunches, I just don't think this is good anyway, because you get that pattern overload and then a rigidity in the rectus abdominis, which is not good anyway, but particularly not good for singing. I always recommend singers train their core musculature either through functional movement or through anti-rotational exercises, things like Pallof presses or planks and things like that, because it doesn't tend to lead to a massive development of the core musculature, just a strengthening of it, which is essential.